Welcome to Real Estate 360 Live with Ryan Sloper, the trusted name in real estate radio. Now, here's Ryan Sloper.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Real Estate 360 Live. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper. For those of you not familiar with the podcast, my guest and I will cover all angles of real estate, from interest rates to the economy, to what's happening in Washington, the Federal Reserve. Internationally, we'll discuss all of it. We'll talk about the quantitative easing that we always talk about, money printing, and the implications of that. We're now 6 years into this. Janet Yellen is now in control of the Fed. If many of you don't know, her policies have kind of stayed pretty much the same. We've weaned ourselves off of quantitative easing. Now we're acting like everything is moving in the right direction, and now we're planning to start raising short-time interest rates in the near future. We've been patient for some time now would be the language that they've used. And I think that any of you that have been actually patiently following this propaganda that they're pushing out there realizes that the economy is nowhere near where the stock market would indicate. I mean, we've got the stock market yesterday. Let's see, that closed. Let me make sure I have the right number here.
A huge day, Ryan.
Yeah, it was a huge day. I want to say it was close to 18,000. 17,976, up 263 points. The S&P was up 25 to 2,086. Huge day. Mainly, there's some rumors going around that China's going to be starting quantitative easing themselves. We also have oil prices that are falling again, $47.71 a barrel. Does anybody in their right mind think that oil prices can continue at these levels without having major implications here in the United States? I, for one, don't think so. But many will say that people are going to be able to save more money at the pump. They're going to be able to put more money back in their pockets, and they're going to be able to put more money back into the economy. It's actually not happening because we actually have the personal spending numbers back out, and it appears that the savings rate of people is at a 2-year high. So we've got all these indicators that are moving in opposite directions. None of them are good. And I wanted to kind of start with this home values are rising faster than wages, because many outlets have been putting this out. We have an article by Real Track. Lewis, joining me on our panel as he does each and every week, is Lewis Camerasano. Lewis, I want to get your take on this. You had written an article, I want to say it was back in 2013, we came on the show to talk about this. You added another paragraph into that, and it was the dark side of rising home prices. And Realty Track just recently, March 25th, came out with an article which home price appreciation outpaces wage growth in 76% of U.S. markets during the housing recovery, and that the home price appreciation is outpacing wage growth by a ratio of 13 to 1. 24% of markets with wage growth outpacing are basically home price appreciation. There's only 24%. I would imagine that the majority of those are in the metropolitan areas. But I want to have you kind of refresh our listeners' memory a little bit on that article that you wrote in 2013 and where you see things at this present moment.
Okay, Ryan. Well, if you look at the most recent numbers, you had an increase of 0.1% in spending. And you did have some wage growth in the most recent report, but you don't have any increase in spending. And there's a reason for that, Ryan. And it ties into your inability, or people's inability, to buy homes, because demand has been brought forward for 6 years, supposedly, with QE. And when you bring demand forward, 6 years worth of it, consumers are tapped out. And then when you add in, you have increased health care costs, you have student loan debt. There's just not and you have increased rising food prices. Beef is at an all-time high. There's no money left to buy houses, especially, as you just pointed out, home prices rose, I think, 17% according to Realty Track, between 2012 and 2014, and wages only grew 1.3% during that time period. So even if wages were keeping up, there's still other factors in the economy that would prevent people from buying homes in large quantities despite the low interest rates, because other expenses are also rising. So what I had written a couple of years ago, Ryan, was called The Dark Side of Rising Home Prices. And one of the whole elements and features of quantitative easing that the Fed under Bernanke, under Yellen have stated is that rising home prices are good for the economy because it makes people feel richer because they have more equity in their homes. And couple that with a rising stock price, a rising stock market, and people go out and spend money. The problem with that is the stock market gains are either trapped in people's 401k, so they're not going to spend that money, or they're in very wealthy people's portfolios, and there's only so much gas, there's only so much food, there's only so much of the basic consumer durables, iPads, iPhones, whatever they are, that rich people can buy because they don't need to buy 600 iPads. They don't need to buy 700 pieces of 700 refrigerators for their home. So the dynamic of rising home prices creating a robust economy is false. Same with the rising stock market. It's trickled down, and it really is only trickle up to the more wealthy people who have stock portfolios and who own homes. But in any event, if you go back to housing, if wages are rising only 1.3%, and then you have home prices going up 17%, and the media cheering this on as if this is some kind of nirvana that home prices are up, it's not. It's just making home prices more unaffordable for millennials who are trying to enter the home market, who not only are facing the same economy that everybody else does with rising food prices, increased health care costs, and so on, they're also facing student loan debt and poor job prospects. So the home affordability is moving way out of reach for the millennial. And if you're a part-time worker, same thing. It's very hard to go to your loan officer and say, hey, I just got one of these jobs that shows the economy is robust and strengthening and so on. It's part-time, but how about a loan? You think, how about you come back when you have a full-time job and you've been working for a couple of years? So the rising home prices, in addition to creating unaffordability, Ryan, they're artificial, but they've been artificial for 6 years, and now they're talking about raising them. So they've reached the point where they've already tapped out the consumer on credit, and now they're saying we're going to start to make credit a little tighter, a little more expensive. And then they're wondering why consumers aren't spending. Well, if they couldn't spend with the zero interest rates, they couldn't buy homes at the low interest rates, how are they going to buy homes at higher interest rates? Now, that's not an argument for them not to raise rates, but from the Fed's point of view, if they're scratching their heads wondering how come people aren't buying things, how come consumer spending is down, they only have to look at themselves. They brought by offering so much free credit, they've brought consumption forward. And QE and stimulus and under Keynesianism is really a temporary boost to the economy. It's not meant to be a permanent 6-year fixture. It doesn't even work on a temporary basis. But once you start it and you let it go for 6 years, then there's only so much you can do to the economy. The consumers are tapped out, minus going to negative rates. And if you go to negative rates, you're now telling consumers, don't even bother saving your money, spend it, because it's costing you to keep it in there. And Janet Yellen, we were talking about before at the beginning of the show, she mentioned on Friday in a press conference that cash isn't a good store of value. Well, then what is? Stocks? I don't understand what she was saying, but I guess what her point was, Ryan, is that negative interest rates in Europe aren't stimulating the economy. People are probably saving their money anyway, realizing they're probably sticking it under their mattress because they don't want to pay the bank to keep it in the bank. But she's wondering why people aren't spending money. It's because they don't have money to spend, and they've already tapped out. And I think what we're seeing, Ryan, is the failure of monetary policy to actually solve economic issues that are largely created by poor monetary policy. There's only so much they can do, other than, to your point, Ryan, which is just hand out the money. But then they'd wonder, why don't they spend it? And the only way they can fix that, I suppose, Ryan, is they have to hand out the money and then make sure that there's a mandatory purchase attached to it. I mean, this is really where they're going, is their control policies, their central plannings aren't working. So what does that mean? They have to do more central planning to make it work, because when they put in effect a central plan and it doesn't work, they have to double down on it. And the way they've doubled down on it so far, Ryan, is what? More QE. And that's probably what they're going to do again, although we've speculated on prior shows that perhaps they do something different and don't call it QE. Maybe they do mandatory purchases or something. who knows what they do, or they hand out money. But the central planning isn't working, and they're never going to just step back, Ryan, and say, oh, maybe we should lay off intervention for a while. Maybe we should just see how the economy would restructure on its own. Do you think that's going to happen, Ryan?
Not at all. I memean, you've highlighted all the reasons why interest rates can't go up. They can talk about it all they want, and they might make a play to raise 0.25% at some point in time for credibility to say, look, we stick to our guns. The economy's starting to turn the corner. But you and I both know that it's not. And all the fundamentals. So the fundamentals that we're looking at that would be a good gauge for the housing market turning the corner where we could have an appreciation. And we don't have any wage growth. We have student loan debt that's mounting. We have health insurance premiums that are rising. We have low interest rate environment, which would, if you just look at a low interest rate environment, many people are thinking just because it's a low interest rate environment that naturally we should have price appreciation. And that's not the case because, it is low interest rates is going to force certain people into the market that may not otherwise want to be in the market. There's a lot of people that want to buy homes, and it's just because everybody's pushing and saying, hey, it's low interest rates, you need to take advantage. And while I agree, if you can get a loan, it makes sense to do that for the most part. We have a stock market that is at ridiculous highs here. So if it was people actually taking money out of their stock portfolio and paying cash for a house, then it would make sense if everybody was doing that for house prices to go up. But the average Joe doesn't have a stock portfolio, right?
Not of that magnitude.
No, they don't. And they may have a retirement account, but they can't go snatching out of the retirement account to go put down cash on their home because, they're either going to have to take a distribution and pay major taxes on that or take a loan out on their retirement account, which if somebody did that, hey, it may make sense. I've seen many people do that. But that's not the majority of the population. And, it's very bothersome to me because there's not really any indicators out there that would tell me that what's going on right now it has us headed towards the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see it. And you bring up a lot of points for why the Fed will continue to do what it's doing, if not expand their programs to call it something else. It's not good. The term QE has gone out the window. Just start saying drop bags of cash from the sky. That would be a better plan probably at this point.
Helicopter drop.
Exactly. We do it in other countries. We might as well just start doing it here. And what's interesting is the Fed thought that by making cheap money accessible to banks that there would be trickle-down economics, and it's just not the case because the banks realize, oh, great, we get to borrow money for next to nothing. Why lend to anybody? We don't have to. We'll invest that money. We'll make returns in the stock market. We don't have to take the risk where we can manipulate, play both sides. We can short the market or arbitrage situations where they're guaranteed to make money. They don't have any incentive to help the average Joe, the average American, to lend money out to help businesses grow. That's not what it's set up for. It's a byproduct of an artificially manipulated low interest rate environment. That's not going to change. It can't change. As we mentioned, the government cannot continue to sustain the debt levels at a higher interest rate.
Right.
Now, will they make a move of 0.25%? As I mentioned just a second ago, I think at some point they will, just like they did before when they started to taper down the QE program, except they can't keep going with those interest rates. They can't. Because at some point, guess what? There's a money call that they don't have unless they turn on the printing press again, and then we're going to have a lot more issues to deal with. But oil is a problem. Wait 6 months from now. I guarantee you that this oil is going to be a crisis. It's coming.
Ron, let me interject on the Dallas Fed number was down 17%, and a lot of our fellow prognosticators said when the oil prices started going lower that this was going to act as a tax cut and a stimulate. It hasn't acted as a tax cut at all. I mean, a tax cut stimulates consumers, QE stimulates the banks, but this isn't a tax cut because there are other factors that more than offset the lower oil prices because people are so deep into debt, they're saving the extra, they're not going out and spending it. And we haven't even scratched the surface. And the reason, by the way, the reason the Dallas Fed is down 17% is there's a slowdown in economic activity due to the shale oil companies slowing down their production and laying off workers. When you have fewer people working, there's fewer people out spending money, fewer people producing any goods. So that whole area, and then there's banks that are going to lose money on the loans and the hedging activity and the derivatives that they have off of these companies. So we said from the beginning that this is a black swan covered in oil. This is far worse for the economy than just the benefits. It outweighs the few benefits of the few dollars that people have in their pocket after the gas price is lower. And this is going to cause chaos. And when they raise rates, people are thinking, oh, that's going to be bad for the price of gold because the dollar is going to get stronger. No, it's going to create chaos in the emerging markets even more, just a hint of higher rates. If they actually go through and raise rates and then continue to raise rates, and then the U.S. economy goes down, they're going to have to then quickly reverse course because the dollar will be too strong. There'll be a massive volatility, and there'll be a snapback in the value of the dollar right back down because the Fed won't allow it to go much higher. Because then Americans supposedly having an industrial renaissance and exporting, well, that's out the window. That won't continue if the rest of the world is lowering rates and can't afford to buy U.S. goods.
Right. Well, and you know, Louis, that I'm big on maintaining that nothing is really going to take place on Obama's dime, right? You hear me say that time and time again. So we're headed into, presidential campaigning territory again. And do you really think that there's going to be something that happens of a magnitude of like them raising rates before this next election? And maybe just one for credibility's sake, to say that things have moved in the right direction and they can continue to push out this fake information, these false readings, the false sense of hope that people are getting from, we get one thing here. Let's go through these breaking news from yesterday. February pending home sales are up. Contracts signed but not yet closed. It jumped 3.1% versus an estimated of only 0.4%. So this is good news. Okay, great. Pending home sales. So then we come down. February personal income was 0.4 versus estimated 0.3. Personal spending was 0.1 versus estimated of 0.2. Now, everybody would assume that since people are saving money at the gas pump, that all of a sudden more money would go back into the economy, but yet it's not happening. Matter of fact, the savings rate is at a 2-year high. Now, take this with a grain of salt because I'm one of those guys that doesn't really believe most of what comes out in these economic reports. We talk about it because we have to, because this is what the general public gets, but they can manipulate these reports however they see fit. And exactly. I don't think that it's 100% that these reports almost probably get signed off on them by the Fed before they even get released, so the Fed knows how they can answer the questions behind these reports.
Right. They're not surprised by anything.
They're not surprised. And so if we know that they're not surprised, Louis, the question that I'm getting now is okay, so I hear what you're talking about on your show. I hear that you're talking about that they can't raise rates. So is there a possibility for mortgage interest rates to actually go down further? I actually think that there is.
Sure.
I actually think that
they need them to be lower.
Correct. And as you mentioned, nobody can really get loans now at the levels that they're at. We have home prices that are appreciating at a much higher level than wage growth, right? So how is the Fed going to be able to continue at the pretty, lame sales pace that we have now? How can we keep that if prices continue to go up and blocking even more millennials out? Well, how do they do it? They have to let rates go lower by essentially the same margin. And if they don't do that, then it's going to continue to push people out of the housing market. They won't be able to buy. Or you'll have more investors coming in and continue to buy up. If they can get loans, they'll continue to take investment loans and rent those properties out. But they'll be the primary people that are out there purchasing. So I do actually think that we might start to see mortgage interest rates slide back up a little bit further. That's good news for people that can qualify for homes. But as mentioned before we came on the show, Louis, I've had numerous clients, one in particular that's actually applying for a loan, trying to buy a new home through a builder. Took them 3 or 4 months. They've been dealing with this lender, and they can't get the loan done. But they're not ever giving the reason why. Okay. So I send this file over to my lender. My lender starts to review it, immediately finds that there's an issue with student loans. Now, for those of you not familiar, I want to touch on this real quick. So there's deferment of student loans, and then there's forbearance of student loans. The term forbearance in the mortgage world is like the equivalent of foreclosure, like something that you do not want to see on the credit report. If it says deferment, That's better, because if your student loans are deferred, it's essentially like, okay, you're still going to school, you're going to continue to go to school, and we're going to defer those until you stop going to school. And if you are taking out like an FHA loan or a government loan, and you can show proof that those loans are deferred for 2+ years from the time that you take that loan, then you don't have to count the payment against you, okay? So it's critical to understand that component of it. But forbearance is essentially saying that you have a hardship going on and that you can't make your payments right now, and we'll defer it out for a specified period. Well, now, what do you think that the student loan people were telling this potential client about forbearance, Louis? They were telling them that it's not going to affect their credit negatively. Okay?
Well, it may not affect their credit negatively, but it will affect their ability of the lender to think that they can meet the ratios, right?
Absolutely. Right? And they don't even like the word forbearance, because as soon as you say forbearance, then you have to explain yourself as to why you have the need to go into forbearance when you're trying to take out a mortgage on the other side, right?
Why can't you pay your student loan, but you're going to be able to pay your mortgage?
I'm telling you right now, Louis, if I'm the underwriter and I'm the lender giving you money, and you come to me and you tell me that you've got basically $1,500 a month in student loans that are in forbearance right now, and you're trying to take out a $500,000 mortgage, I'm going to tell you you go ahead and hit the road, okay? Because you're not getting a mortgage from me. You're not. So that's common sense. So if we know that to be the case, how many other people are running into the same issue? How many other people? Now, remember, they don't even take into consideration your health insurance premiums, guys. So we not only have student loan debt to worry about, we also have health insurance premiums to worry about. We have, all these extra things that don't show up on the credit report that are debts for people. And I can't help but to believe that most people are at a break even, if not losing money at the end of every month.
Right. So how is consumer spending going to go up? Forget even buying a house.
And yet they're saying that actually we have a savings rate. I actually don't even buy that, Louis. I don't even buy that there's extra money left over, right?
You know what they're doing? Maybe they're fabricating that number, Ryan, so that they can say now there's pent-up savings, and it's going to come off the sidelines, and it's going to be invested in the stock market, it's going to be invested in housing. Maybe that's why they're trying to boost the savings rate number more than it actually is. I agree with you. I think that the spending is down, the savings is down, because the consumers are tapped out and they're now getting wage increases. They just don't have any money in general.
You can't not feel these rising insurance premiums, the student loan debt. Because if anybody has
rising food prices, I don't care what the CPI says. Beef is at an all-time high, and so are other foodstuffs like eggs and so on, chicken. That's where people spend their money. I don't know what basket they're putting in. They can use hedonics. They could say that you eat soybean burgers instead of burgers. Prices aren't rising. They are.
Well, if you were let's say you were in high school, and you're coming out of high school, and somebody says, hey, look, you're going to go to school for 6 years. When you come out, you're going to have $1,500 in student loans, essentially a mortgage, a small mortgage, waiting on the other side.
And you can get a job drawing race together on coffee cups at Starbucks when you graduate.
Well, and the irony behind this is, and especially in the D.C. metro area, is that it's well known that everybody says, go to college, get your degrees, then go get another degree, then go get another degree. You'll get a high-level government job based upon those credentials. Well, guess what? If you're making $100,000 and you have $1,500 in student loans right off the bat, and then you have health insurance premiums, let's call it another $500 or $600 for an individual on top of that,
and a car loan. No, but even let's say you have a modest car loan, add that in too.
Okay, so now we got.
You haven't put any food in your mouth. You haven't drank anything yet. What do you have? $2,500.
Well, let's say $1,500. Let's say $500 for health insurance. Let's say $400 for car. So now we're at $2,400, and we're talking net money here. We're talking net.
And when you make $100,000, what do you take home? 70.
Well, and so we still
after Social Security, after Medicare, after state and local taxes and federal taxes.
Let's call that 30%, right? So now you're bringing home 70% of your income. And essentially just those three things that we listed was about 25% of your income, okay? Now, you haven't spent, like you mentioned, anything on groceries. If you have kids, you're in big trouble.
Well, then your insurance is even higher.
Your insurance is higher. Then you have child care, okay? So when people tell me that they make $100,000 a year now, which back when it used to be like, okay, you're making a decent living.
Six figures was like a thing you would say someone was making six figures, they were richy rich.
But do you know what I equate six figures to now? I equate it to $50,000 a year. That's what it means to me, because you're not seeing that money.
Maybe it's not struggling in Alabama, but you can't even live on $100,000 in San Francisco. You can't live on it in New York City, the New York metro area. You probably can't live on it in the Washington, D.C. I mean, you can live on it, but you can't live on it in the traditional middle-class lifestyle where you're getting a mortgage and you're having a house, 2-car garage, maybe 2 cars in there, 2 or 3 kids. You can't do it.
And I'm merely stating these numbers and want to put it in that type of context, because I'm sure many people that are listening to this might say, you know what, that is kind of a similar situation to me, or a friend or a neighbor or family member that's been trying to get a mortgage and can't, or, you know, you're trying to set yourself up to be in a position to take advantage of low interest rates, and you're wondering why it's a struggle to do so. And everybody always turns to the lender to say, I can't believe that they asked me for all that. They ran me through the TSA machine.
Yeah,
you know,
they want to find out whether you can pay them back, and they realize you can't.
Yeah, they basically asked me everything, you know, but my kid's height, weight. You know what I mean? There's a reason why they're doing that, guys. They don't really want to lend to you at the level of interest rate. Now, FHA, if you've noticed, when they started losing market share to conventional loans, all of a sudden they lowered their mortgage insurance premiums. If housing numbers continue to go the way they're going and nothing gets better, their next move will be to lower insurance premiums even further. This is what happens. They always overregulate, they outdo themselves, and then they understand that they put a huge damper on the market, and then they have to try to correct it. However, anytime you try to correct something, it takes a long time. It doesn't happen immediately.
And it creates more imbalances, and so the whole thing, that's what happened in 2008. They kept forcing people into houses, changing the lending rates, liar loans, ninja loans, and then you finally have a collapse. And what do? They get praised for fixing it by putting in more programs, more stimulus, more bailouts.
What would have an immediate impact, like for people to be able to buy houses? It would be to give them down payments again. It would be to say, here's free cash, go buy a house.
Well, the other thing would just be to allow interest rates to set their normal rate, and eventually the economy will restructure around that rate.
Well, you're talking about rational thinking. That's not what.
No, that's not going to happen.
That's not.
I have a question for you, Ryan. You mentioned, and I know this has been your point of view ever since we've began our discussion, is that the Fed is hell-bent on keeping the status quo. Yellen obviously wants to keep her job. Nothing's going to happen on Obama's dime. But aren't there powerful forces working against that? For example, the oil lobby has got to be against Obama, and this basic, what they call treason, what the Republican senators did in trying to undermine Obama's Iran deal. They're getting attacked because, with the low oil prices. They can't be happy with these low oil prices being used as a geopolitical chip for the Obama administration to go after Russia. It's undermining the Saudi relationship. It's undermining the Israeli relationship. And of course, Obama is an enemy of carbon-based fossil fuels causing global warming and so on. So I know he and Yellen, and of course Yellen is looking to Hillary to win to reappoint her. Obviously, a Republican would not reappoint her. So aren't there influences on the oil lobby, the Republican side, that are trying to undermine or actually lobbying for a rate hike? Because why else would Yellen even be talking about a rate hike when she was talking about negative interest rates? She's been a big proponent of QE. Why? It doesn't make any sense. If you think about it, right, it makes no sense for someone like Yellen and the Fed that's been on this QE train to be talking about raising rates when the economy is not where they want it to be. They admit it's not where they want it to be. They've encouraged other central banks to do QE. It doesn't make sense why they even be talking about it, other than they're being pressured to raise rates. They're being pressured to kind of change the tack, either from China or from powerful forces within the United States in the oil lobby. Because this isn't good for them. The oil people are getting their heads handed to them in Texas and globally with these lower oil prices. They can't like that.
No, they can't like it, and I do agree with you that there are probably some powerful forces at hand here, but I don't know. talked about this kind of ad nauseum about, okay, at what point does something happen? And it always seems to me as right as soon as we start to get to the boiling point or the point where, the S is going to hit the fan.
Right.
They start talking about Greece or Ukraine or China or Japan or Europe or something else.
Well, maybe in this case they're talking. The talk is they just say, well, okay, there's no debt problem, there's no dollar problem because dollar's not going to turn into because we're going to raise rates. So that's all gone. People are on the other end of the spectrum. They remember when we started talking, the dollar was toilet paper, was going to zero. They were printing too much of it. All they had to do was start talking about they had to stop QE after 6 years. Everyone's forgotten about that, and just talk about raising rates, and that made the dollar stronger. Well, they eliminated that whole cottage industry of movies and YouTubes and and rants on CNBC about the dollar going to zero, hyperinflation, just by talking the dollar back up, by claiming they might raise rates basically on a superficial short-term interest rate, ceremonial, symbolic rate hike of 0.25%, and just stopping QE. And that's it. Even though they haven't stopped QE, Ryan, because they're still doing it, they have given no indication when they're going to stop rolling over the principal into new treasuries. So they're still stimulating the economy, and we're still at basically zero interest rates.
I hear what you're getting at there. The old saying, talk is cheap, but when it comes to the Fed, apparently it's not.
Oh, it's golden.
It's golden.
No, they don't believe in gold. It works.
I think that they understand everything that you're talking about here. I'm sure they are being pressured in a sense, but what I feel like is that they really follow the media and they really follow the coverage of what's taking place in our country. And I feel like all they're really doing is saying, they're starting to talk about okay, we've been on this for 6 years, and it's how long are the interest rates going to go on for? And look, everybody else in the rest of the world is doing this too. So how could we position ourselves as the supreme power of the world?
They can't let that meme actually become a laughing stock, so that the propaganda doesn't work anymore, that people just ridicule them. They have to see it as, well, we're not doing that. So, and by the way, take that. Look what happened to the dollar.
Absolutely. So
next time you open your big mouth and start talking about hyperinflation and gold, just remember. I remember there was a thing where Ron Paul was holding up a silver coin, waving it in Bernanke's face. And while he was doing that, the price of silver went plummeting.
Crazy.
He's giving a live interrogation of Bernanke, and he's talking about silver and gold, and it was almost like, well, put that coin down, because look what just happened. We just sold a bunch of paper contracts and knocked it back down. So had he gone on TV and made those points, everyone was shaking their head and saying, yeah, Ron Paul's right. What are you doing to the dollar? What's with this reckless monetary policy? And gold and silver went up in response. Then he'd gain some credibility. But instead they smack it down, and it's just like this old man waving a piece of metal in front of the supreme leader, Bernanke.
Speaking of Bernanke, how ironic is it that he now has his own blog where he's advocating not raising interest rates?
Yep.
Okay? So remember, this is all part of the plan.
He's not a private citizen now. He has payback. He's out there. It's not like he has a new point of view and he thinks that rates shouldn't go higher. He's basically adding to the chorus so that when they decide not to raise rates, Bernanke said it didn't make sense to raise them either. It never, from their point of view, it doesn't make sense to raise rates at all. Not from a Janet Yellen, Ben Bernanke point of view. Ben Bernanke said in 2009, the time to raise rates was when the economy started to improve. It hasn't. And then we would raise rates, we would sell off the bonds that we accumulated. Hasn't happened, and there's no reason to think now. In fact, the time they've done it, according to their fake statistics, was last summer when they had the GDP at 5%. Now when you got the GDP, according to Goldman Sachs, Societe Generale, for the first quarter being at 1.2%, well, that's because of the weather, and then the Atlanta Fed having it at 0.2%, why would you raise rates on in an economy you went from 5% GDP in the third quarter, 2.2% in the fourth quarter, now in the first quarter down to 1%, say? Why would you raise rates into a declining GDP?
You won't.
Doesn't make any sense.
You won't, unless, as I mentioned, it's just purely a play of credibility to basically go along with the theme that everything is moving in the right direction.
It's worked for a year now, though, Ryan, because it has. The dollar has improved. You still have people thinking the U.S. economy is going to grow this year. Every year the projections turn out to be wrong, but every year they have a different reason, a different excuse, a different angle. That just bides them more time. I think that's what this whole thing is about, is just biding time because they know there's no way out of this.
Well, it is, because we're 6 years in at this point, and I remember you and I having conversations week in, week out 3 years ago that, hey, when is this going to stop? When is this going to stop? When is this going to stop, right?
Yeah,
and
you know when you find yourself in a hole, you stop digging? That usually helps. It does. The hole is so deep. They just have to keep digging.
They do. They are probably getting the most precious metals on Earth at this point, right?
They're in the molten core of the Earth. They're coming out the other side. Remember, when you were a kid, you come out in China.
Right. It's literally insane. I mean, digging for 6+ years. We had the final revised fourth quarter GDP at 2.2. They were expecting a revision to 2.4. So even
these are their own made-up numbers. And, Brian, in the GDP, they're including Obamacare expenses was the biggest driver of consumer spending. Healthcare expenses, utilities expenses because of the cold winter. If you didn't have the cold winter, you'd have lower because people would have spent less to heat their homes.
Well, think about it, though. This fits the narrative again, though, because then it can say we have to continue to evaluate the data, right?
The data, right. The job market's not really as robust. Of course it's not. It's not solid. But the unemployment rate is 5.5%?
Right. Not enough people feel comfortable spending their money. You know, they prefer to save it. No, they don't prefer to save it. They don't have any to begin with.
Exactly.
I'm sticking with that because I don't really believe that people's savings accounts are all of a sudden going up. I don't. I'm not buying that at all. I'm not buying it.
No.
And they're starting to push that type of propaganda out there because I feel like if they talk about it, if they keep saying, you know, everybody's trying to save money, the people feel good when they're saving money, but that's not really what's taking place, guys.
They want to mention that now that they've saved this money, just like with the millennials, they want to say everything is pent-up demand. They brought so much demand forward. Now they're looking to 12-year-olds to stimulate the economy because the people of spending age have already been tapped out. Now what they're trying to do, I guess, is create the narrative. People are saving money, plus you have the double whammy of now the millennials are going to start spending. The people that had saved money are going to start spending. And why were they going to start spending? Because did they save? Because the Fed had this 0.25% interest rate on the table, so people started saving in anticipation of getting higher rates. I mean, you can make this stuff up because they do.
Oh, they do. And don't think that 2016, when presidential election takes place, that they won't have some sort of millennial homebuyers program. Okay? For what they'll do is they'll forgive your student loan. They'll give you a free loan. They'll give you a down payment. I mean, this is where we're headed because, see, they are never going to fix the problem because the problem...
They can't.
The problem started...
You can't raise rates, sell off the Treasury garbage that they bought, and then pay off the debt. That's not going to happen. It can't happen. It's the same with Greece. Everyone thinks Greece is fine because no one's talking about it that much anymore. Greece can't ever pay back. In fact, the Greek government is still asking not to cut the government expenses and to keep the welfare system intact. On what money?
Well, but Louis, you know what? It doesn't matter.
Same here. What money? Where are we going to pay for all of the warfare expenses? We're bombing Yemen now. We've got increased food stamps now. You got Social Security, more people retiring, Medicare, Obamacare. Military spending needs to increase. Is the production going higher? No. In fact, the GDP rose less than, over the last 6 years, the amount of money they spent on QE or printed on QE.
Right.
All right. So then, and what did they do with that money? They bought bonds to borrow money to pay for what I just mentioned.
And it's never going to be where one day they wake up and all of a sudden they're worried about a budget. They don't care. This is like the way they continue this stuff is continue to fight wars, right? Continue to do things that will put them in a position to say this is why we have to continue doing what we're doing.
It's bread and circuses and wars. Basically, you give people stuff so they feel like, well, this is working for me, so why am I going to criticize it? And if it's not working for you, hey, do your patriotic bid. Look, we're going over there. We're cheer for the flag because we're bombing somebody.
Well, and as I mentioned, with all the social programs, and I believe the food stamps are up to like 55 or 60 million people at this point.
That's ridiculous. Yes.
With all the people that are relying,
a lot of them young people in college, they give it to you. If you go to college, they give it to you.
Well, if you're on these social programs and you're getting just enough to where you can feed yourself and get by, you're gonna think that, okay, well, I guess everything's not as bad as it could be. And see, the difference between us and the rest of the world is that we give more to people than everybody else does. In South American countries like that, the poor would just be poor. They wouldn't be getting food stamps.
It's funny, Ryan. I heard some commentator say with a straight face, and he was right, China doesn't have to support a social welfare program. I'm thinking, but they're communists. They should be. But basically what they're saying is the billion Chinese people don't get assistance from the government. Mm-hmm. They got to go to work. That's the government program is they make them work 18 hours a day in a factory to produce goods for the state. That's their communism, and basically let them keep them a little bit of money they give them.
Where versus here, we just give away.
Just give them money. They don't have to work for it.
Yes, you don't have to do anything. So there's no way.
Who's socialist and who's communist? What difference does it make? In fact, the other way is more productive for the economy, but it makes the people less. China has a problem because they've basically, from what it sounds like, and I haven't been to China, I don't know how exactly it works, but it seems like they basically are forcing them to go to work because they have no alternative. Because if they stay out in the farm areas, they're going to starve. Whereas they can come into a city and work long hours and get paid.
Yeah, we're here. We're actually advocating for people to not work by giving them just enough.
Go back to school as if because you've learned more about gender studies or whatever it is you study, you're going to be more marketable. I mean, you'll be able to draw on a coffee cup better.
Well, I'm just so sick of the answers that are always put out there to questions like, about school and that education is the answer for everything. And it's
no.
The reason why these part-time jobs, aren't turning into full-time positions because there's just not enough education there, Lewis.
Right.
They haven't been educated enough. They're not quite ready to move up from the fry flipper to the hamburger maker. They haven't had enough education. I mean, it's such a lame excuse at this point.
And what do you learn in college? I mean, you don't learn practical skills. You learn from professors who are bought into the whole command and control economy. What's the focus last week in the news when you have a bad economy? Indiana passes a law that says, I don't know what it said. It said you can refuse service based on religious grounds to gay people. All right. Now, I don't know what the big deal is other than why would you want to, if you were gay, to get served by somebody who's against you? Similarly, you wouldn't want Nazis serving. There's people that just don't get along. Now, I know it's not so much. I suppose it's a civil rights issue, but my point is that is it really a national issue that's the most pressing thing that's facing our country? It's not like you can't get a birthday cake made somewhere else. It's not like economic activity. There's only one place where you can go. Then it'd be an essential facility, and then in a sense you would have the government, in a sense, what's the word? Discriminating against you, and then it would be illegal. Then the government's not allowed to say we can't give you a license because you're whatever. The government is not allowed at all to discriminate, but individuals have a right to discriminate against each other. I mean, you do it all the time, and it would be actually unfair to make somebody do something that's against what they want to do. It's a form of coercion.
Well, remember we talked about this. These stories are going like quarterly cycles, right? Like, so every 60 to 90 days, there's a new one. And do you think that it's ironic that basically the president has his own like social media team, and all they do is scour the internet and Facebook and look for what's popping up next that they can make into this huge fiasco?
This story, what I was saying is, I wasn't trying to be insensitive, is that it has nothing to do with most people's lives. It's not an issue, but they make you think about it, just like what Starbucks try to do. They try to inject race into your coffee cup. Well, it's highly intrusive, because who decides what issues are most important to people? Generally, people decide what's most important to them. They wake up in the morning, and the first thing on their mind isn't someone in Indiana didn't get a cake made for them. That's not part of their. It's an issue for the people who wanted the cake made, or the person who are going to make the cake. But it's really not an issue for 99% of the people. Similarly, what happens in Ferguson probably isn't an issue in your own neighborhood. But they say, yes, it is. It is, and you need to talk about it. Well, maybe I don't want to talk about it because I have other issues. And I think that's really what they try to do is they try to distract you from your own financial and social issues, which may be better or worse, but are probably better than they're making them out to be, so that you focus on those things and rather than your own welfare.
Well, you mean you actually have to figure out how you're going to pay for your next health insurance premium?
Exactly.
You have to worry about your next student loan.
You shouldn't be on Facebook typing in responses about an Indiana cake manufacturer when you have a job at work to do to get paid.
Well, and social media has been one of the greatest distractions, right? It allows,
absolutely. It's not a productivity
It allows
gainer.
people to actually escape reality and live in the world that they want you to live in. I firmly believe that. I mean, it's just like if you disconnected from the news, naturally you'd be a happier person, right? Well, imagine what happened if you disconnect from social media.
Well, sure. What if you were just connected to your, and this doesn't exist. You don't have local newspaper. You don't have local news. So you're focused on national and global issues. That's exactly what they want you to be focused on. Most people could care less what goes on in Yemen. And they say, well, Yemen's important because it's, okay, but there's other parts of the world. Ukraine, there you go. Why would anybody in the United States, in Topeka, Kansas, New York City, wherever they live, wake up in the morning and have to worry about what's happening in the Ukraine? When they have enough to worry about. There's coyotes running around on the roofs in New York City. That might be a bigger problem for you. Wouldn't you think?
I do agree with you, and it's interesting that you say that.
Do you want people in the Ukraine to be worried about coyotes on the roof in the Bronx?
Well, they could
make it a problem. They could make news stories and put it out in the global media and talk about coyotes on the roof, and and people would be saved at coyotes on one side, other people would get rid of the coyotes. They're a human menace, threats to humanity. People writing on coffee cups, save the coyotes.
The things that are really important.
It's so manipulative when you think about it.
It is. And the things that are really important that do matter, a lot of the stuff that we talk about, that we joke about, that we have to make jokes about because it's been 6 years and it's just been the same thing year in and year out. And to think that the next president is going to do something different regardless of whether it's Republican or Democrat, you're out of your mind.
Absolutely not.
You know what I mean? And I think that people have.
And it can't be on the national level. It has to be on the local level. If you want any political change or any change, if you don't want political change, it has to be people concerned about where they live. We all don't live in the Bronx with coyotes on the roof. We all don't live in Ferguson. We all don't live in the Ukraine. We live where we are, and you improve your own area, your own circumstances, the world takes care of itself. Charity begins at home, basically.
Yeah, I agree. It does start at home. We talk about this each and every week. It's like, okay, great. Everybody's talking about how difficult it is to get a home loan. Does that mean that you're going to have the same experience? Not necessarily. But if you just take everybody else's word for it, you may not even go and apply for a loan. Okay? So I always suggest and advocate reaching out, figuring out what your options are. Even if you plan to rent for the next 10 years, is there anything wrong with you going and applying for a mortgage to see where you stand today? Absolutely not, because guess what? You may find out that you do qualify. And why can that be different from one person to the next? Because one person could be a military vet and they qualify.
Right, VA loans, right?
They could get a VA loan, 100% financing. They may qualify for a special loan with a credit union that caters to nurses or doctors or firemen. there may be a 7-Eleven worker where there was some sort of grant or set aside for them. And I'm making that up. But my point is that I can't sit here and tell you that each and every person is going to get qualified. But what I've seen is that certain people that I felt should not be qualified were qualified, and the ones that I thought were qualified weren't qualified. So, you just have to take the proper steps, which is just, calling a local professional. I always advocate a mortgage lender, okay? Start with a mortgage lender. You can also try credit unions. And if you don't, find a real estate agent that works with all of these different banks, credit unions, and mortgage lenders to help guide you in the right direction, because I can promise you that you're going to get different answers from each entity.
Right.
And, you just kind of have to navigate the process. And I'm happy to say that I've been able to get people home loans, people that I feel like they felt like their situation was so down and out that they were never going to get a home, got them into credit repair, whatever was necessary, and 6 to 10 months later, they're buying a home at a low interest rate environment that's cheaper than what their rent is. That's why I'm in the business, is to be able to help people make good, informed decisions, help them better their situation. And to me, I look at myself as a protector, because I ultimately know that if you can control the cost of your largest debt, which is your mortgage, or maybe right now it might be health insurance or student loans, but I'm guessing it still might be the mortgage. If I can control the cost of that for a 30-year period and protect yourself against future inflation, which is inevitable at some point, that I'm putting them in a better financial position. And that's what it is for me. And that's why we do this show, Louis, is merely educating and trying to informing people of what's actually taking place versus what's being put out there.
And what's important to you personally in your process of buying or selling a home.
Yeah, absolutely. And for every individual, it's something different. So remember when you read these news articles, remember when you're listening to the radio or whatever it is, does this really apply to me? Does this affect my everyday life? Because if it doesn't, then you know what? Turn it off.
Yeah, but you know what? They make it do. They make it so that it affects your life, because they interject that into your daily conversation. If all your friends who don't live somewhere are talking about what happened elsewhere, then they've won control over your mind. Because that's what you're talking about. Look, we're talking about it. I'm not interested in a lot of these things that they put front and center. In fact, the best thing the alternative media or people can do is not even comment on mainstream media stories that have nothing to do with them.
Yeah, and I think the reason why...
you create your own narrative. What's important to you, and talk about that.
Well, and I think that there are many people that listen to our show, Louis, that agree with what we talk about, primarily because, there's principles that should be in play here with our economy and politically, but our country is not operated the way it used to be. And at this point in time, it's just like, okay, so what am I to believe? And, this show is more about giving somebody another option. If they are going to tune in, maybe they would tune into this versus something else, right? And I don't think that we're the end-all, be-all by any means, but I do feel like we've been covering this for some time now, and it's kind of, I think we have the narrative down. I think we know how this is going to go. We just don't know how it's going to end. And,
well, we know how it's going to go. It's going to continue to be distraction after distraction, and when everything doesn't work out, they'll have so many convenient scapegoats to blame, and, of course, they will have the solution at the ready, which will be another massive intervention program, because people will beg them to put it in effect for them.
I told you.
It's the old, they break your leg, they give you a crutch, and they say, see, without me, you couldn't walk.
I told you, 2016 Millennial Home Buyer Program.
That'll help.
It's coming. We're up on the hour, Louis. I want to thank you for coming on, as always.
Thank you for having me.
Give our listeners your blog so they can check out your blog post this week.
Sure, it's Smaulgld.com, Smaulgld, real estate, economics, gold and silver analysis. Please check it out. Thanks, Ryan, and thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe, share. You can also leave a review on iTunes. If you don't have an iTunes account, you can also stream the show at realestate360live.com. There's an ask a question button on the right-hand side. Until next time, guys, take care.